They called him the Shield of Detroit. 31 years on the force. 3 commendations from the governor's office. A man who gave speeches at police academies about honor, service, and the sacred oath of law enforcement. A man who attended funerals in full-dress uniform and shook the hands of grieving widows. Chief Raymond Kowalski of the Metro Detroit Police Department was, by every public measure, a legend. He was also the man running one of the most sophisticated domestic corruption and extortion networks ever dismantled on American soil. The FBI called it what it was. Not negligence, not carelessness, not a few rotten apples. This was command-level collusion. This was engineered betrayal. And for 11 years it worked perfectly. Until it didn't. Over 400 federal agents, 47 simultaneous arrest warrants, 14 precincts, 2 city halls, 1 federal courthouse, and a private security firm were all touched by what investigators would later call the most shocking institutional rot ever discovered in a Great Lakes metropolitan area. We are talking about a shadow government dressed in police blue, operating openly inside the structures designed to stop exactly this kind of criminal enterprise. Stay with us, because the deeper this goes, the worse it gets. 4:17 in the morning. Metro Detroit. A Tuesday in late November. The city was still, the kind of still that only comes before something breaks. A cold fog rolled off the Detroit River, curling around the orange glow of streetlights on East Jefferson Avenue. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train groaned across a bridge. Nobody was watching. Nobody ever is. At 4:17 in the morning. That was about to change. 3 blocks from the river, at a converted warehouse operating under the registered business name Lakefront Logistics Solutions, 12 FBI agents in tactical gear stacked at a reinforced steel door. They wore no badges on the outside. Just black. Just quiet. India Surveillance Unit had been watching that building for 62 consecutive nights. What went in and out wasn't freight. At precisely 4:19, the ram hit the door. Flashbangs. The crack of light and percussion that turns a room white and silent for 2 seconds, long enough. Agents poured through in practiced formation, voices sharp and controlled. 3 men inside scrambled. 1 dove for a back exit and made it exactly 4 steps before an ICE tactical officer put him face down on a concrete floor covered in plastic sheeting. The other 2 surrendered immediately, hands up, eyes wide, the kind of eyes that know it's over. What agents found inside was not logistics. 44 kilograms of cocaine vacuum sealed in commercial shrink wrap. 11 kilograms of methamphetamine packed inside hollowed-out automotive parts. And stacked along the east wall, over $300,000 in banded cash, organized by denomination, sitting next to a commercial-grade counting machine. But that wasn't what made the lead agent stop cold. Behind a false panel in the warehouse office, the kind of false panel you only know about if someone told you, agents found 2 things that changed the entire direction of the investigation. The first was a prepaid burner phone with a single contact saved simply as R. The second was a sealed manila envelope containing printed patrol grid schedules for the Metro Detroit Police Department. The grids were annotated by hand. Certain patrol routes had been circled and crossed out. Someone had been clearing the road. That someone had a name. But they didn't know it yet. Not fully. Not with proof. That was what the next 48 hours were for. By 6:00 a.m., as the first arrest teams were processing suspects at a federal holding facility in Wayne County, a separate unit of FBI cyber forensic analysts had already been working through the night in a secure lab on the 4th floor of the Detroit field office. They were running decryption protocols on 3 hard drives seized from a separate location, a private members-only social club on the west side called the Iron Room, registered as a nonprofit fraternal organization for retired law enforcement officers. The Iron Room was not a fraternal organization. It was the nerve center of something the FBI, once they cracked the encryption, would officially designate Operation Anchor Chain. The network diagram that assembled itself on the analysts' monitors as the data unlocked was not the kind of thing you forget. It was vast. It was deliberate. It was beautiful in the horrifying way that only something meticulously designed can be. A spider's web built by someone who understood systems, who had spent decades inside systems, who knew exactly which threads to pull and which to leave untouched. At the center of the diagram, connected to every major node by encrypted authorization keys and digitally signed transaction approvals, was a single user identifier, a username the tech team had been hunting for 3 months, tied to a separate dark money coordination network they had been calling Ghost Badge in their internal files. Ghost Badge had a real name now. Investigators cross-referenced the digital signature against law enforcement personnel databases. The match took 11 seconds. Chief Raymond Kowalski, Metro Detroit Police Department. Badge number 1104, the man who commanded over 2,000 sworn officers. The man who held press conferences decrying cartel violence and drug trafficking in Detroit's neighborhoods. The man who, 3 years earlier, had personally accepted a Community Leadership Award on behalf of his department at a ceremony attended by the governor. Raymond Kowalski wasn't just dirty. He was the architect. What agents were looking at wasn't a corrupt police chief who had taken a few bribes. This was an entire ecosystem, what investigators would later describe as the Iron Shield Syndicate, a domestic organized crime operation that had used the authority and institutional infrastructure of the Metro Detroit Police Department as its operational backbone for over a decade. Shell companies. Ghost corporations, a private security consulting firm called Sovereign Guard Solutions, LLC, which on paper provided corporate risk management and had contracts with 3 Detroit area hospitals, a casino, and 2 logistics companies. In reality, Sovereign Guard Solutions was the financial laundromat, money collected through the syndicate's extortion network, businesses in 6 Detroit area zip codes paying protection fees disguised as consulting retainers flowed through Sovereign Guard into a series of offshore holding accounts registered in the Cayman Islands and one in Cyprus. From there, it came back clean. Into real estate, into a waterfront property development company, into a restaurant group with 4 locations in the Detroit metro area. The FBI's financial crimes team estimated the syndicate had laundered over $42 million in an 11-year operational window. $42 million. Extracted from small businesses, independent contractors, auto shops, restaurants, and nightclubs across Metro Detroit, all of whom had been told, in various forms, by various intermediaries, that certain protections required certain payments, and who enforced those payments. Who made sure that businesses that didn't cooperate found themselves cited for zoning violations, visited repeatedly by city inspectors, or discovered that their 911 response times had quietly degraded? The sworn officers of the Metro Detroit Police Department. The men and women who had no idea who they were really working for. This is not corruption. This is not a scandal. What Operation Anchor Chain was uncovering was a parallel government. A second enforcement structure, wearing the uniforms of the first. It had just been switched off from the inside. 5:55 a.m. Federal Operations Command Post. A converted conference facility in Dearborn, 12 minutes from downtown Detroit. The digital map on the main screen showed 49 red markers pulsing across the Metro Detroit region, Wayne County, Oakland County, Macomb County, and 3 points along the Michigan-Ohio state line. Each marker was a target. Each target was a node in the Iron Shield Syndicate's operational network, safe houses, record storage locations, financial relay points, 3 private residences belonging to senior police officials, 1 address tied to a city council member, and 1, the largest and most heavily secured, a compound in an exurban area northwest of Detroit registered to a private firearms training facility. 412 federal agents were in position. The command post coordinator, a senior FBI special agent in charge who declined to be named publicly, gave a single order at exactly 6:03 a.m. Go. Across the entire region, doors came off hinges simultaneously. In Dearborn Heights, a SWAT team hit the private compound and found a fortified basement containing operational records, encrypted communication hardware, 17 illegal firearms, 3 of them fully automatic and federally prohibited, and a safe with $380,000 in mixed currency. 2 men inside the compound were arrested without incident. A third was found hiding in a crawl space beneath the facility's shooting range. In Warren, agents raided a commercial storage facility that on the outside was indistinguishable from the dozens of others that lined the industrial corridors of Macomb County. Inside, they recovered what investigators described as the syndicate's administrative archive, physical records, printed ledgers, and an external server containing 11 years of encrypted payment records, extortion logs, patrol grid alteration schedules, and internal police communications that had been systematically copied and stored as leverage. Leverage. against officers who tried to push back, against inspectors who asked too many questions, against anyone who looked too closely. In the affluent suburb where Kowalski's deputy, a man named Assistant Chief Gerald Pruitt, owned a $1.2 million home with an in-ground pool and a 3-car garage, agents arrested Pruitt in his kitchen at 6:09 a.m. He was still in his bathrobe. His phone showed 17 outgoing calls in the 2 hours before the raid, all to numbers that were already flagged and monitored. He had known. He had tried to warn someone. The calls had not gotten through. By 10:30 a.m., 31 individuals had been taken into federal custody. The underworld of the Iron Shield Syndicate had taken more damage in 5 hours than in the previous 5 years. But Raymond Kowalski was not among them. Not yet. The arrest of Raymond Kowalski was not a raid. It was something quieter, something more precise, something that the FBI had clearly decided would be done in a way that the public would remember. At 11:47 a.m., 3 hours after the regional operation had swept through the syndicate's infrastructure, Kowalski arrived at his office at Metro Detroit Police Headquarters on 3rd Street. He had been called back in. Someone from his own command staff had told him there was a briefing required about overnight federal activity in the city. He came in his uniform, all 31 years of it pressed and pinned to his chest. He walked past the officers in the lobby. He took the elevator to the 4th floor. He walked through the bullpen where detectives looked up at him with expressions he likely read as concern, but which were something else entirely. He entered his office and closed the door. 12 seconds later, it opened again. 6 FBI agents entered. They were followed by a federal prosecutor who held a sealed warrant signed by a federal district judge at 3:47 a.m. that morning. They read Raymond Kowalski his rights in his own office, in front of his own desk, beneath a framed photograph of him shaking the hand of a former mayor. He said nothing. His face did not change. His hands, those steady hands that had shaken so many others over 31 years, showed nothing when the cuffs went on. But when they walked him out through the 4th floor bullpen, through the lobby, past the officers in the building who fell silent one by one as they saw what they were seeing, Raymond Kowalski looked straight ahead and did not look at a single one of them. That was the tell. A man who had nothing to hide would have looked. He would have protested. He would have spoken. He looked at nothing because he knew exactly what was behind him. The federal courthouse on Lafayette Boulevard in downtown Detroit had seen significant trials. But what unfolded in Judge Patricia Oyong's courtroom, Judge Oyong representing the federal bench, drew observers from 3 separate U.S. attorney offices, 2 congressional oversight liaisons, and a packed press gallery that hadn't been that full since a case involving a major automaker 2 decades prior. The government's case was not complicated. It was the opposite of complicated. Prosecutors had 11 years of encrypted financial records now fully decoded. They had internal police communication logs showing deliberate patrol rerouting on specific dates that corresponded precisely to the movement of syndicate assets across the city. They had testimony from 14 officers who had come forward voluntarily after the arrests, officers who described years of subtle pressure, unexplained deployment changes, and a departmental culture in which certain questions were simply never asked. They had 3 cooperating witnesses from inside the syndicate itself, men who, faced with the weight of the evidence against them, had chosen to speak. And they had the digital signature. The encrypted authorization key. Raymond Kowalski's personal identifier, embedded in 11 years of operational directives that had coordinated the syndicate's protection network, directed the financial laundering architecture, and, most devastatingly, authorized the systematic alteration of patrol grid data to create windows of operational safety for the syndicate's activities. The defense argued that the digital signature had been cloned, that Kowalski had been framed by criminal elements seeking to neutralize a police chief who had been too effective against organized crime. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 11 minutes. When they returned, Raymond Kowalski stood in the same courtroom where he had once testified against drug traffickers and gang members, the same courtroom where he had sat in the gallery during the sentencings of men he had put away. He stood there in a suit that cost more than most of his officers earned in a week, with a legal team that had been paid for through money that federal prosecutors alleged was syndicate-linked, and he heard 12 citizens of the Eastern District of Michigan find him guilty. Guilty on 4 counts of racketeering under RICO. Guilty on 6 counts of extortion under color of law. Guilty on 3 counts of obstruction of justice. guilty on 2 counts of money laundering conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to 37 years in federal prison without parole. When the sentence was read, Kowalski's face, that controlled, unreadable face that had served him for 31 years, broke for exactly 1 second. Just 1 second. And in that second, in front of the press gallery and the federal observers and the officers in the room who had once worked under him, Raymond Kowalski looked like exactly what he was: a man who had betrayed everything. After the courtroom cleared, investigators pulled the final pieces of Operation Anchor Chain into a classified briefing document that would be shared with the Department of Justice, the Des Office of Inspector General, and a congressional subcommittee examining law enforcement integrity frameworks. What that document revealed about the depth of the infiltration was not something that stayed classified for long. The Iron Shield Syndicate had, at its peak, 43 officers and civilian employees of the Metro Detroit Police Department on varying levels of its payroll. Not all of them were active participants. Some had simply been paid to look away, to not notice, to not file, to not remember. But 43 individuals embedded across patrol divisions, dispatch, internal affairs, and the department's financial oversight office represented something that the briefing document described with unusual directness. This was not a compromised department. This was a captured one. The report found that for at least 6 years, the syndicate had received advance notice of any significant law enforcement operation that touched its interests. Not because of sophisticated hacking, not because of elaborate spycraft, but because Raymond Kowalski sat in the weekly joint law enforcement briefings, listened to what the FBI and DIA and ICE were planning, and then walked back to his office and made a phone call. 6 years of law enforcement operations in the Metro Detroit area had been filtered through a man who was also the enemy. Officers in the department who spoke to federal investigators described a feeling they struggled to articulate. Not quite betrayal. Something deeper. Something that touched the very premise of why they had put on a uniform in the first place. One officer, a 22-year veteran who had worked under Kowalski for 9 years, put it simply. He said he felt like the ground had dissolved. Like everything he had stood on had turned out to be painted on glass. The Department of Justice's response was immediate and structural. An emergency oversight board was installed. The FBI's Public Corruption Unit embedded a team within the department for a transitional period. A wholesale review of every arrest, every prosecution, every internal affairs decision made during Kowalski's tenure was initiated. A review projected to take over 2 years and to touch thousands of cases. The badge would be rebuilt. From the ground up, it had to be. Pull back from Metro Detroit for a moment. Look at the larger picture, because what Anchor Chain exposed in the Metro Detroit area was not an isolated phenomenon. The financial forensics team identified money flows connecting syndicate-linked accounts to similar extortion and protection networks in 3 other major Midwest cities. The same shell company structures. The same offshore relay accounts, the same model. Find the authority figure, own the authority figure, and let the institution do the work. The Iron Shield Syndicate was not just a Detroit operation. It was a template. Investigators found evidence suggesting that Kowalski himself had served as a kind of consultant to similar networks in other jurisdictions, traveling to conferences, meeting contacts, and in at least one documented digital communication, advising on structural best practices for integrating criminal revenue streams into legitimate institutional frameworks. He had been teaching. How many others had learned? That question was still open at the time of this filing. It may be open for years. Federal investigators in multiple districts were actively pursuing leads. The full scope of what the Iron Shield Syndicate seeded across the Midwest was still being mapped. What was clear, undeniably, documentably clear, was that Raymond Kowalski had looked at the institution of law enforcement and seen not a calling, not a responsibility, not a trust, but an infrastructure, a set of tools. A machine that could be pointed in any direction by whoever controlled the controls. He had spent 31 years making sure he controlled the controls. That was the plan. That was always the plan. To build enough credibility, enough reputation, enough political and institutional insulation that no one would ever think to look. To build a fortress out of trust. The system had not been infiltrated by the Iron Shield Syndicate. The system had been the Iron Shield Syndicate, wearing a badge and running a department for over a decade. That is not corruption. That is not a rogue officer. That is engineered capture. And it worked until the day that a burner phone, a sealed envelope, and a set of annotated patrol grids found their way into the hands of people who still believed in the oath. Think about what fentanyl does to a neighborhood. Think about what methamphetamine does to a family. Think about what cocaine does to a community that is already fighting to hold itself together against every economic and social pressure the modern world can bring to bear. Now think about what it means when the person whose job is to push back against all of that is instead the person clearing the road for it. Detroit's communities absorbed years of harm during the period that Operation Anchor Chain now covers. Families lost members to overdoses. Neighborhoods were destabilized by the confidence that criminal networks operated with, confidence purchased by corrupted patrol routes and leaked intelligence and an internal affairs office that had been quietly redirected away from anything that mattered. The cost of what Raymond Kowalski did is not measured in the $42 million he helped launder. It is measured in people, in the son who found his father, in the mother who buried her daughter, in the small business owner who paid protection money for 6 years because the alternative had been made clear to them, in the honest officer who followed orders and didn't know whose orders they actually were. Power does not always need open violence. Sometimes it only needs silence and ambition. Sometimes it only needs one man in the right office willing to trade everything for the architecture of control. Raymond Kowalski had that ambition. He had that silence. And for 11 years, he had that office. Now he has 37 years. If you stayed through this entire story, tap like, because this kind of investigation takes years to build and it deserves to be seen by everyone who still believes accountability is possible. Comment the word anchor if you want more stories about federal operations that finally brought the powerful to the ground. Share this with someone who thinks corruption only happens somewhere else, in someone else's city, under someone else's watch. Because Raymond Kowalski gave speeches at police academies, he shook hands at funerals, he wore the uniform every single day. And for 11 years, nobody knew. Until they did.